The Las Vegas Raiders and the New Orleans Saints will go head-to-head on Sunday, and they're nothing more than two teams that are simply limping to the finish line. We got all of that and much more for you on this crossover Thursday edition, Locked on Raiders and Locked on Saints. Let's get it.
You are Locked on NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome into another Crossover Thursday edition, Locked on Raiders and Locked on Saints, here to break down this Sunday's matchup, Week 17. The Las Vegas Raiders traveling to the Big Easy to take on the New Orleans Saints. Some familiar faces all around this matchup. Going to be a ton of fun. Here to break it down is your boy Q, host of Locked on Raiders, and myself, Ross Jackson, over at Locked on Saints. We appreciate you very much for making Locked on Raiders and Locked on Saints your first listen, and for being an everydayer here on the shows, which are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we're going to break down what each of these teams needs to do to get a win, why Brock Bowers can completely take this one over. Derek Carr is trying to get back on the field to face his former team, what a revenge game could potentially look like, and both of these teams limping to the playoffs and also, or not the playoffs, limping to the offseason, Q, and also potentially limping towards trying to figure out if either of their young quarterbacks could be their future starter. Whole lot to talk about in this matchup. We're here to break it all down on today's show, which is brought to you, as all Crossover Thursdays are, by our friends over at Prize Picks. You can download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Q, two teams limping to the offseason. No playoffs in sight for either of these matchups, but certainly a lot to prove in this game, I imagine, for both sides of the football.
I'll tell you this, man. This is a game that really looked like a sexy matchup when the schedule was released.
For
right?
real. It's a whole different outlook now, baby.
Yeah, it was like New Orleans, the end of the year. It's right around New Year's. Yeah. Derek Carr, the Raiders, Foster Morrow, like it was so much hype and excitement about this one. Now it's like, well, these two teams are just trying to get to the finish line and get to the offseason.
Yeah, that's it, man. That
wild,
is
man, how seasons change, right? Right before your eyes. It's just that's how the NFL goes. But yeah,
absolutely, man.
It's going to be fun anyway. I mean, again, because there are storylines in this one. Obviously, the Raiders are trying to figure out who they are, and it's a shame that it's Week 17 and they're still trying to figure it out. But offensively, they've gone through a carousel of quarterbacks, and to be honest, they've gone through a quarterback carousel since Derek Carr was let go, right? Removed on from and ended up in New Orleans. They've had a carousel quarterback. So Aidan O'Connell, again, is getting his opportunity. He looked like he was lost for the season back in Week 14 when he left the game against Tampa Bay on a cart in an air cast, and he only ended up missing one game, the Falcons Monday night game, and he returned last week on Sunday against the Jaguars. So he's going to get another start to try to prove who he can be, if he could be the franchise quarterback. I think most people have doubts that he could actually be that guy. But Ross, when you have the film out there to prove what you are or what you're not, that's kind of how you solidify it. So there's a big game, the next two games, obviously, for Aidan O'Connell, just to kind of give himself a chance at potentially being that franchise quarterback moving forward.
Yeah, the Saints have a very similar situation here. Of course, Derek Carr is dealing with an injury right now, a left-hand injury when he tried to dive and pick up a first down on second down up against the New York Giants in a game that they were already winning. But, look, go out there and play your heart out, I guess, leave everything out on the field. But the Saints are now in a situation to where they're doing something similar with Spencer Rattler, trying to figure out if he could potentially be their future guy. So what are some of the things that you're looking for when it comes to Aidan O'Connell up against this New Orleans Saints defense in this matchup that could potentially prove positive that Aidan O'Connell could be that guy for the future in Las Vegas?
Well, he's really comfortable in Scott Turner, who's the interim offensive coordinator. He's really comfortable in his offense. I feel like Scott Turner has really found a quarterback that fits with what he wants to do, get the ball out of his hands really quickly. But for me, what I really want to see from Aidan O'Connell is not just necessarily go to the first read all the time. Like sometimes allow a play to develop a little bit more, right? It seems like a lot of his passes are either right to the first read or it's to a check down, right? It's not like, okay, the first read's not there. All right, maybe let's go through the progressions and see. Maybe we can even have a bigger play. Like there was multiple times against the Jaguars where I saw Jacoby Myers running open, and instead it was like, all right, here's a check down to Amir Abdullah. My first read, Brock Bowers isn't there. Let me go to Amir Abdullah. No, just go through your progressions because other guys are breaking open. But it feels like he doesn't trust either the offensive line. Maybe he doesn't trust himself. He doesn't want to take a sack. He doesn't want to get hit. Whatever the case may be, I'd like to see him go through the progressions. I'd like to see him trust his O-line in front of him and just see how things develop. And, the playmakers obviously are Brock Bowers. We'll talk a lot about him. Jacoby Myers is another playmaker. Big Michael Mayer, he's another playmaker that was just drafted in the second round a year ago out of Notre Dame. He's fantastic. And even Trey Tucker, who has speed, he can hit the deep shot. But, again, you've got to allow those plays to develop. So a lot of times with Aidan, he's just, all right, my first read's there. Boom, I'm going to deliver it. Oh, my first read's not there. Check down. That's what you don't want to see. And this is not a disrespect or a shot at Derek Carr, but I think we saw 9 seasons of Derek Carr checking the ball down a lot because he wanted to pick up something, which I respect that. You want to pick up something, but sometimes, man, you got to allow that play to develop. You got to go through your progressions and hit the guy that could be breaking open that you can either hit while he's breaking open or you can even throw him open. That's what separates, the good quarterbacks from the great quarterbacks. Great quarterbacks can throw guys open. Good quarterbacks wait for them to be open.
Oh, that's such a big thing. Spot throws, all that. Look, risk aversion was such a big part of the conversation around Derek Carr following his first year. Kind of cleaned some of that up, got a little bit more aggressive in offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak's offense in the early goings of the season. But then, of course, the injury set in and everything just kind of went downhill from there, very quickly here in the Big Easy. Looking over on the defensive side, I think you got another guy that a lot of Louisiana sports fans will be familiar with that's also looking to prove something and prove he can be a part of the fabric of this team moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt, because the fact that the Raiders defense and really the team in general is the walk-in wounded. The defense doesn't have Maxx Crosby. The defense doesn't have Christian Wilkins, the big fella in the middle. They don't have Malcolm Kuntz. He never made it to the season. He tore his ACL. But they do have this guy that I think everyone in the New Orleans area is very familiar with, K'lavon Chaisson, former first-round pick of Jacksonville. Jacksonville waived him, and Tom Telesco, the Raiders GM, picked him up off of waivers. And Russ, he has 4 sacks so far in 13 games this season with the Raiders. He has a pass block and a pass interception all in the same play. He tipped it up while he's falling to the ground. He intercepts it. That was against Tampa Bay Week 14. And look, in Jacksonville, he never had more than 3 sacks in a season. In one season, he never had more than 3. He's got 4 with the Raiders. It's something about the Raiders organization and what Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator is doing that is making him comfortable. And he told me in the locker room following the game against Jacksonville on Sunday, I would like to see Vegas be my home, right? He's in the last year of his deal. It's contract year. He obviously was picked up off of waivers, so he's going to be a free agent. He wants to have a long-term solution, a long-term home in Vegas with the Raiders. Obviously, that's something for the offseason, but he's out there getting after it. And with no Maxx Crosby, you would think that, hey, it's going to be tough sledding out there. But he is actually filling the void of really Tyree Wilson, who was a former first-round pick that hasn't turned into what the Raiders were expecting him to. He's coming along, but he's coming along slowly. All of a sudden, Chaisson is stepping up. He's making plays. He always has a smile on his face. He's a guy that I really enjoy watching. I want to see how he finishes this season really strong and how he makes a case for himself. Like, hey, Tom Telesco, I'm here. You can sign me. Right? I'm comfortable. I could run across from Maxx Crosby. We could be a really good 1-2 punch. I think he's making a case for himself. And Raider Nation is really starting to find that guy that they're somewhat falling in love with. He might be in a diamond in the rough that Telesco came up with.
That's going to be big to watch in this game, too. The Saints are expected to be without starting center Eric McCoy potentially for the remaining 2 games of the season, as well as left guard. I know they're on the interior, but Eric McCoy's one of the best at IDing and letting his quarterback know here's where the pressure is coming from. So that could potentially play right into K'lavon Chaisson's kind of MO there as he gets into this. We're into evaluation season, I think, for both of these teams. And Chaisson's definitely one of those guys that has a real opportunity. And there's some guys for the New Orleans Saints that have a real opportunity as well, but not before a couple of stars potentially try to get their way back to the game. We thought this was going to be a Derek Carr revenge game. He's out with injury, but it sounds like he's interested in making that a reality again. Let's get to that as we continue on with this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints crossover Thursday is brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. Have you ever used Rocket Money and found out 2 different times that you were paying for subscriptions that you completely forgot that you were paying for? Well, that's definitely what happened to me. And that's why I'm so glad that I signed up for Rocket Money that goes through, checks all of those potentially unwanted subscriptions, lets you know that you have them, if you got them, you can get rid of them and don't play yourself. I did the same thing you're saying right now. There's no way that I have subscriptions that I didn't know I was paying for. I pay too much close attention to my bank account, all that other stuff. Don't play yourself. It's completely possible. Go and check them out over at Rocket Money today. Not only are they going to help you out with your unwanted subscriptions, but one of my other favorite features that they have is the goals feature, which will automatically set aside money for you every month to make sure that you're investing in your future. And in that way, there's no more stressing about monthly budgeting and all that stuff. Rocket Money has your back. So cancel those unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Visit rocketmoney.com/lockedon today to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, continuing on with this crossover Thursday edition, Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints. I hope everybody has happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that good stuff. And of course, a Happy New Year on the way. The New Orleans Saints have been without their starting quarterback, Derek Carr, for a few games now since they played the New York Giants in New York just a couple of weeks ago, and have turned to rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler in the meanwhile. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to see Derek Carr on the field against his old team, the Las Vegas Raiders, because Q, he is fighting his tail off to get back out there. I know he's not the only revenge game player that we're watching out for. A lot of former Raiders in that New Orleans Saints locker room and on staff, but you have to imagine that there's an extra motivation for Derek Carr specifically to get back for this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, DC is one of those guys that will try to downplay it all week long. And, maybe because he's not 100% healthy yet, maybe he doesn't have to speak as much, but he'll try to say, it's just another game. It's important. I want to go out there and put my team in the best position to win. But deep down inside, as everybody does, right? I mean, you always want to flex on your ex a little bit, right? So I know Derek Carr enough to know that he definitely wants to try to flex on the ex a little bit. And so I'm sure that he's going to have a good time and really work his tail off, as you mentioned, to get back into this into action and be able to start in this game, especially at the crib too, at home.
Yeah.
So he has the home crowd behind him. He's definitely going to feel good about himself going into that game. He's going to definitely want to take advantage.
Yeah, I got to tell you, man, if I was ousted by this podcast network and I had to go to another podcast network, and then I had a situation where somebody was inviting me on a Locked On show, but I lost my voice, you better believe I'm drinking all the tea. I'm squeezing all the lemons. I'm down on all the honey. I'm coming through on that podcast, and I'm letting them know you should have never let me go. Now, of course, I'm not going anywhere here at Locked On, and neither is Q, but goodness gracious, would I be trying to make sure that I came back and showed everybody what they were missing out on. And I think that's exactly where DC is as well.
There's no doubt. And, Ross, really thinking about this offense, whether it's Derek Carr, thinking about Spencer Rattler or whoever is behind center, there was, a couple weeks where it's like Clint Kubiak is the hottest thing cooking. Clint Kubiak's going to be a head coach in 2025. Man, they're going to have to find a replacement for him. I know Raider Nation was like, man, they should have hired him as the OC. See, should have got him first before New Orleans. Clearly that's tailed off. But what was really the biggest reason? Why is that tailed off? Was it injury? Was it more than that? What's really kind of the math behind what happened with Clint Kubiak and this phenomenal offense that they had the first few weeks?
Yeah. New Orleans Saints fans don't want to acknowledge it. They hate to acknowledge it. I personally don't like to acknowledge it either, because the Saints will tell you that they don't want to acknowledge it. But I do think that the injuries have had a major impact. But I do have other things too from a schematic standpoint. And if we're honest, all this kind of still falls back to the limitation that this offense has had without its top stars. No Rashid Shaheed, no Chris Olave at the wide receiver spot. Taysom Hill, of course, was a big part of that. He was in and out of the game plan, in and out of the availability conversation throughout the season. Of course, his season came to an end against the Los Angeles Rams a few weeks ago. But I do think that a big part of it too was a lack of a counterpunch, Q, for this offense. This offense wants to be able to establish itself on the ground game, right? That's what they want to do. It's a wide zone offense. It's what every offense wants to do in the NFL. But the good offenses in the league have a second punch. Every major fighter had a second punch, a third punch. This is not a Muhammad Ali. This is not a Mike Tyson like it looked like in the first 2 weeks. This is a team that lacks that second punch. And so I think that their lack of ability to be able to pivot away and still be able to produce is what's limited them the most when it comes to what this season turned into versus what it started out looking like.
Yeah, man, it started out looking fantastic, right? I mean, points points. Everybody was scoring points. I mean, New Orleans was the hottest thing cooking. It's like, man, Clint Kubiak, he's going to have his pick of jobs in 2025, and clearly that has tailed off just a little bit, or quite a bit, I would say. I mean, look, both these teams, as we both talked about, are looking for the offseason, trying to limp to the finish line, and both teams are riddled with injuries. Cam Jordan is your guy. He's the the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Saints. I love what he's doing, even in year 14. Seems like that he's always happy. Similar to what I was saying about Chaisson in segment number 1, we were talking about the Raiders. He seems like he's always playing with a smile on his face. Cam Jordan looks like he always has a smile on his face. What is it about that dude that makes him tick, and how revved up is he going to be to go on Sunday?
Yeah, I think he's going to be really, really excited, especially after this last game. You have seen his snap percentage tick up since Dennis Allen was fired. Former Las Vegas Raiders head coach, of course, or former Raiders head coach, of course, was fired in week 9. You saw his snaps go from around 41% Q up to about 54 or so percent. And he was rewarding the team with, he had a multi-sack game, his first 2-sack game in about a year or so last week up against the Washington Commanders, where they got to Jaden Daniels, the expected rookie of the year, 8 times in that matchup. But in this last game in Green Bay at Lambeau, you kind of saw his snaps come back down a little bit, and then you saw that defensive line continue to struggle. So I think that he's going to be ready and raring to go in this one. I think that there's the Derek Carr conversation of the revenge game. There's the Foster Moreau conversation of the revenge game, but there's also all the guys that give a crap about those guys that also want to rise to the occasion and kind of get a charge from what that revenge game could look like. And so I think Cam Jordan's absolutely one of those who's always looking for the additional motivation to go out there. And coming off of a 34-0 shutout on Monday Night Football on national television, these guys are, and I'll borrow what Cam Jordan would usually say. Well, I won't borrow exactly what he would usually say, but let's just say they're pretty mad. All right. They're a little ticked off. Right. We'll say it that way. We'll keep it family friendly in case anybody's listening at Christmas dinner here, or day after Christmas dinner here. But I think that absolutely there's some of that. And I think the thing that makes him tick is how much he loves the game. And I think you saw that from some of the best. You saw that from Cam Newton all the time, smile on his face. Jameis Winston, not always the most reliable guy, but always happy because of how much he loved the game of football. I think Cam Jordan's got a lot of that as well.
What we saw on Monday night, and of course, Saint fans don't want to think about it as it was the first shutout in all season, right? It took 16 weeks to get a shutout, but that's what it was. It felt like to me, Ross, that game was over after the first drive. Josh Jacobs, former Raider, touched the ball. I don't know how many times, but he had his way, either catching the ball, running the ball, stiff arming folks. I mean, he was just doing whatever he wanted to do. The Raiders don't have a great run game. Don't get me wrong. And I know Antonio Pierce wants to run the ball, but he doesn't have a great a running offense. They just don't. They just have struggled to be a consistently good running team. But what is it that has been the biggest struggle for the Saints defense when it comes to trying to stop the run?
It's definitely been yards before contact. That has been huge for this team. I think that they're in the top 5 when it comes to yards before contact per attempt allowed. And so basically when Q and I are talking about yards before contact, what we're discussing is the amount of yards that a running back can pick up before somebody comes in contact with them from the defensive side of the football. Josh Jacobs is a guy that has the most rushing yards in the first quarter of any back across the entire NFL, and the Saints, still knowing that they needed to key in on that, were not able to stop him despite that. So it's one of those situations where you know where the ball's going, but you still couldn't get it done. So I think that yards before contact is a part of that. The reason why the Saints struggle there more specifically is because they simply get moved off the line. They lose the line of scrimmage on defense. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They just don't have the anchor to control that line of scrimmage, Q. And I think that that's what ends up causing them so much grief in the run game. And that's why I think the last 2 games of the season, a lot of these players are out there trying to perform for jobs, right? We talked about evaluation season earlier. A lot of these players are on notice. They're playing for their jobs here. There are some exceptions to that. Of course, some of the young guys, some of the older veteran guys, but some of the guys that haven't been around for very long, especially with an upcoming head coach change happening here in New Orleans, there's going to be a lot of these players that are out there with something to prove on Sunday. So hopefully you see them be able to do that. But they've got to start winning that line of scrimmage over in the defensive line. If they can't do that, they're going to end up in a ton of trouble. And we're going to dive into all the other things that each of these teams needs to do in order to make sure they don't end up in a ton of trouble as we get to what each team needs to do to get a victory. And I'm going to tell you why Brock Bowers is the guy that terrifies me the most most looking at this matchup for the New Orleans Saints defense. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with this Locked On Raiders, Locked On Saints crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints crossover Thursday also brought to you, our friends over at FanDuel, where you can walk away with a bag right now. Yes, the playoffs are on the way. No, the Raiders and Saints are not even sniffing that conversation, but that doesn't mean that you can't walk away with a bag before the regular season is over, especially with our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can put $5 down on your very first bet. If you win that $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win that first $5 bet. So go and find a Week 17 heavy favorite, whether it's a Christmas games, a Thursday night game, or beyond. Take that big favorite, not the Raiders, who are favored 1.5 points, though, on the road up against New Orleans Saints. You want to find a big favorite like the Green Bay Packers from last week, the Buffalo Bills from last week. Put that $5 down, and that's your chance to win $250 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, y'all, it is crossover Thursday here. Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints. Your boy Q from Locked On Raiders, Ross Jackson here from Locked On Saints. Every one of these crossover Thursdays brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. You can download the Prize Picks app today and use that promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. We're here to break down the biggest things that each of these teams needs to do to get a win. And Q, I got to tell you, if there's somebody that terrifies me the most as a matchup for this New Orleans Saints defense, it's absolutely tight end Brock Bowers. The Saints have gotten better against tight ends this season a little bit, but boy, they struggled there big time early, and I think they might struggle again against one of the NFL's best.
Brock Bowers is fantastic. I'll tell you this, man. Ross. He is as advertised and then some. I knew that he was good when the Raiders selected him number 13 overall. I knew that. I mean, just from watching him at Georgia. Okay, really good player. Cool. That's going to be a good weapon. I didn't know he was 101 catches and over 1,000 yards good, right? I mean, I didn't know he was going to be that, and especially with no Devontae Adams. And, oh, by the way, with a carousel of quarterbacks from Gardner Minshew to Aidan O'Connell to Desmond Ridder, back to Aidan O'Connell. Like, he's had so much change and turnover at the quarterback position, and he's over 1,000 yards, over 100 catches, and he's about to break the single-season record as far as just receptions by a rookie of Puka Nacua of 105. And he's got 2 games to do it. Like, that's wild. I just don't understand. Wild. I don't understand how he's so good. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. He's been a bright spot on a bad season, but man, he is fantastic. He is as advertised. Ross, I ask every single person that we talk to on these crossovers, and they're fantastic each and every week. What is the plan? How do you try to slow down that dude named Brock Bowers?
Well, thank goodness the New Orleans Saints play in New Orleans, because they need to bury a gree somewhere. They need some voodoo dolls. They need to cook up something, because they're going to need something otherworldly to stop this guy. I guess the thing that you're really looking for is, can the matchup with a guy like Demario Davis, can he end up rising to the occasion to limit a little bit of what he does, help to take some of it away? But even then, look, Brock Bowers is going to outsize the guy like Tyrann Mathieu, as scrappy as Tyrann Mathieu is. That's not going to work. If you look at Pete Werner, the speed difference, the athleticism difference, that's going to end up kind of edging things over towards Brock Bowers. That's going to be a really, really tough thing for the New Orleans Saints to stop. So honestly, the biggest and best way to stop Brock Bowers is to keep Aidan O'Connell from getting the ball out of his hands. And so you got to hound him with pressure over on the defensive side, make him make some bad decisions, force him to move off, or look for that check down because he feels the pressure. That's the only way I can think of to keep that ball out of Brock Bowers' hands, and all the yards after catch that he picks up against one of the worst yards after catch defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, 11 catches, 99 yards is what he went for on Sunday against the Jaguars. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, again, 11 catches, and they're going to make sure he gets enough targets to break that record and then some. I mean, obviously you saw a very big effort to feed him on Sunday versus Jacksonville, and they've got 2 more games to get it done. Yeah, he's going to get a ton of targets. Well, so when you look at the Saints, though, and you look at their offense, who would you say is the difference maker as far as the playmaker? Who is their Brock Bowers? Not saying it's the same guy, but who is the guy that can help break the back of a defense?
Honestly, I don't know that they have that guy right now,
Ooh,
Q, because it used to be Rashid Shaheed.
yeah,
You would probably put, the deep threat wide receiver. He was the guy that was, 80 yards,
yeah.
75 yards, 63 yards. He could house it from anywhere on the field. Chris Olave was that guy too. Both those guys are done for the season. Although Chris Olave did return to practice this past week, I don't expect that he'll be back after taking a really scary hit week 9 up against the Carolina Panthers. 2 confirmed concussions this season. Was checked for an additional one as well. Has like 5 in his NFL or 5
Oof,
in his career, including
yeah,
college and stuff like that. So they're going to probably take it easy with him. So really, the guy that's the most reliable is the question that you have to ask. And the most reliable guy is Foster Moreau. And as you know, Foster Moreau can go out there and make some plays for you, but he's not going to be a game-breaking presence
right.
for you. So maybe the Saints are able to get Alvin Kamara back out on the field. He was in the head coach's office. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi told us on Tuesday via conference call that Alvin Kamara was in his office Tuesday morning saying, I want to come back. I want to be back on the field after suffering a groin injury in their loss to the Washington Commanders just a couple weeks ago. So that's going to be maybe the guy to watch. This is a dude that scored 4 or 5 touchdowns up against the Dallas Cowboys earlier this season in week 2. He's ready and raring to get back out on the field. He wants to be out there 50 yards away, Q, from his first ever 1,000-yard rushing season. He's never had
Wow.
one.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
crazy, right?
surprises me. Yeah, that catches me
Very
off guard.
surprising.
Yeah, that is very surprising. And I'll tell you this, Ross. Hell, if he played the Raiders a couple more times, he'd have got 1,000 yards. He always had his way. I'm telling you, he's always had his way with the Raiders. He's had
Yeah, right.
success no matter what he did, catching the ball, running the ball, throwing the ball, like whatever he did. He's like the modern day LaDainian Tomlinson when he's
That's
playing
it.
against the Raiders. So I'm surprised about that 1,000-yard mark. I did not know. I wasn't aware of that. That's a hell of a nugget right there. And yeah, if he's able to go, I would say right there, that's the guy that he's, like I said, he's the backbreaker for the Raiders. It seems like it doesn't matter what year it is, he has his way with them.
Yeah, he's going to be the big name to watch here in New Orleans, maybe even bigger than Derek Carr, right? Because if Derek Carr goes out there, but he doesn't have Alvin Kamara, it's still a very different game. But if
Yeah.
Spencer Rattler is at under center and they do have Alvin Kamara, or Derek Carr is under center and they do have Alvin Kamara, that changes everything for that team. So as we look at that in terms of the Saints' lack of kind of game breakers on offense, what do you look at as the kind of 3 most important things that the Raiders have to get done if they do, or even if they don't have that game breaker over in their offensive side?
They've got to just create turnovers, man. They've got to win the turnover battle. I know that sounds really basic, but last week against Jacksonville was the first game all season where they didn't turn the rock over. Like the first game all season where they didn't turn the rock over. And oh, surprise, surprise, they won. Right? I mean, that's just that's what happens if you don't turn the ball over. Jacoby Myers said that in the locker room. We say, hey man, first game you guys didn't turn the ball over. He said, yeah, that's what happens when you don't turn it over. You win games. They have turned the ball over way too much, and they haven't created enough turnovers. They've got the worst turnover differential in the league. They've turned it over way too many times, and they haven't caused enough. Now, to their credit, the last few weeks, they've been able to force some fumbles. Isaiah Polamau, he was able to create 2. He became the AFC Defensive Player of the Week award recipient for being able to do that against Jacksonville, cause those 2 fumbles, and the Raiders recovered. Think about this, Ross. They recovered their first fumble in week 14. That was their first fumble recovery of the season. It took 14 weeks. Like, that's wild to me. That's just
that's wild.
That's unheard of. I mean, you accidentally come up with a fumble recovery, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But no.
Absolutely.
So turnovers.
Yeah, that's going to be big.
Win the turnover battle, create a couple turnovers, and hold on to the ball. You hold on to the ball, you give yourself a chance to win. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to get a win, but at least you'll give yourself a chance.
Yeah, the New Orleans Saints over the course of the last 6 games have been -4 in turnover differential. That's since Dennis Allen was out and Darren Rizzi has become the interim head coach. The Saints generated 14 turnovers over the course of the first 9 games, and the last 6 they've generated a pair. 2.
Wow.
So they have not been a team anymore that has been forcing those turnovers. So that is going to be big to watch in this one. Yeah, right. That works well for the Raiders key. Big one to watch in this one for sure. Meanwhile, they've turned the ball over 6 times over the course of those 6 games. Not one in each game, but that's certainly where they're averaging. 2 other quick things that I'm watching for New Orleans. If Spencer Rattler is under center, obviously you want to keep the pressure off of him. 52.6% of his dropbacks last week up against the Green Bay Packers were under pressure. You're not going to be able to either get any. You're not going to be able to get the best out of the kid if he's under pressure like that. You're certainly not going to be able to get any evaluation of him if he's under pressure like that. And I think too, the other thing is that the Saints just simply have to be able to run the football, and maybe for Clint Kubiak's sake, prove that they can do something on offense, even if they're not able to. But Q, I think you and I hit this one on the head. It's got to be about the game breakers, whether having one or not having one, and it's got to be about the turnovers in this game. This should be an old school, and I'm going to use one of my favorite words here from back in I used to love wrestling back in the day.
Okay.
Needs to be an old school slobber knocker out there between these two teams that are kind of limping to the finish line. It needs to feel like a race, but we know it's going to be a limp by the time it's all said and done.
Well, I'm about to say a slobber knocker doesn't sound like it's going to go fast. A slobber knocker sounds like it's slow. A slobber knocker sounds like it's aggressive and physical and mean. And guess what, Ross? I'm here for it. Let's do it.
I'm here for it, man.
It's in the Big Easy too. What could go wrong?
Ain't that the truth? Hey, it's not like they don't have anywhere to go after the game. They'll be fine.
Exactly.
They'll be fine when it's all said and done.
Exactly.
Well, we appreciate y'all so much for joining us for another fantastic crossover Thursday here. Make sure you go and check out your boy Q over at Locked On Raiders for the Raiders perspective as he wraps up the week, taking a look ahead to this game. You can find more on the Saints over at Locked On Saints every single Monday through Friday with myself, Ross Jackson. For your boy Q, I am Ross Jackson. We'll see you here over on Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints as we continue on throughout the week. Thank you for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer. For your second listen, go and check out another local show, whether it be local to the West Coast, local to New Orleans. Go and support what we've got going on here at the local markets here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you very much for being here. We'll see you again here soon on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.